Rosa de Guadalupe.
Yes.
This specific episode is a very disturbing episode, and I remember watching this episode.
What's it called?
Sales de baño, lo más oscuro. This kid, he's frantically moving, kind of looks like he's on some possessed shit. He's just moving like, and you see a bunch of doctors trying to restrain him, but they keep saying, yo, this kid is like abnormally strong. They were telling the mom, there's something wrong with your kid, bro. This isn't normal. Did he take anything? And the mom is saying, no, he's a saint.
The mom's in denial.
The sister, she ends up finding something in his room. A little baggie with some white powder in it. And she's like, esto es cocaína.
Devil's dandruff.
And he's slowly becoming an addict.
How old is this kid? How old does he
in high
look?
school.
Then they find out that the shit that he's taking is cheaper than actual. He starts getting crazy. He starts burning up, and he has to take off his clothes. Him and his girlfriend go to a party, and they take regular, and he goes back home, and he's kind of like, what the fuck is this whack? I want the other stuff. Fast forward to another party. He wasn't taking the regular like everybody else. He was taking his own shit. And then this is where like shit just hit the fucking fan, bro. He starts taking his clothes off. The girlfriend's like, ooh, let me like get him a little more hot. Let me dance on him. But him, since he's tripping, he starts seeing her like evil.
Like she's a demon or something?
Like some trippy ass shit, bro. And then it just goes to him lunging at her, and he starts eating her face.
Is this a Rosa de Guadalupe episode?
Yes.
And I don't understand why he's the one who got the fucking win, the happy ending at the end.
You know what? They came to the conclusion what he was actually fucking doing, right? Bath salts.
Wasn't that an incident?
What would you do if you found out your sweet little neighbour was actually a serial killer? Dorothea Puente opened up a boarding house in California in the 70s. This catered mostly to clients who were struggling with addiction and mental illness. However, things would only get worse for these residents. One by one, they started passing away, and people started asking questions about what was going on behind the scenes. In the fascinating podcast Killer Psyche, retired FBI agent Candice DeLong explores Dorothea's case and the hidden desires and motives of more cold-blooded killers. It would take years for the gruesome truth to be uncovered about the killer landlady when officers eventually dug up her garden. It was discovered there was at least 7 bodies buried on her land. Everyone was wondering what on earth caused this sweet old lady to start murdering her tenants one by one. Tune in to Killer Psyche to find out. Check out Wondery's Exhibit C library for your true crime fix. From shocking scams to crazy cults to cold case murders, Exhibit C literally has the most nail-biting crime stories documented in such thorough research ways.
In 2015, Chase Dowo was hunting with his brother in Montana when a worst nightmare situation happened. He came face to face with a male grizzly bear weighing up to 400 pounds. Chase only managed to walk a few steps backwards before the bear knocked him down and bit him directly on his head. After this, he bit Chase's leg and shook it around like a dog playing with a toy. The bear then tossed him in the air and continued to try and bite him. As the bear continued to attack him, Chase remembered a story that he read in a magazine once, and I quote, "I remember an article my grandma gave me a long time ago that said large animals have bad gag reflexes. So I shoved my right arm down his throat." Crazy enough, after Chase did this, the bear left and Chase escaped what was almost certain death. Chase's brother then drove him to a hospital where he received treatment for gashes he sustained during the attack. Thankfully, he did not sustain any life-threatening injuries and went on to make a full recovery. But as crazy as it is, if he didn't shove his arm down the bear's throat, he would most likely be dead right now.
If you have children, you need to watch this, because this is incredibly disturbing. I was scrolling through the news today when I saw this headline. And this is something that I've seen happening a lot in our society. Pedophiles are becoming more tech savvy, and they are now using AI bots to generate CP. This is 34-year-old Seth Herrera. Disturbingly, he has a wife and a child, and he was a member of the U.S. Army. He was stationed in Alaska, originally from Texas. Recently, investigators searched Seth's devices, and what they found was nothing short of pure horror. Seth had 3 different cell phones, and on those cell phones he had an app disguised as a calculator that would open up if you input a password. And on each of those phones, Seth had tens of thousands of images and videos depicting CP or CSAM. And some of the children in those videos were as young as infant age. And investigators in the press release described this stuff as disturbingly violent. But that wasn't all. Seth was actually using AI to generate his own CP/CSAM, and he generated these disturbing images depicting abuse of children that were around the same age as his own daughter. I can't even begin to imagine what his wife and kid must feel right now hearing and learning this about their father/husband. But this is a trend that we need to watch out for. I've already made stories about this and TikToks about this, but predators are evolving. And I truly don't understand how they are going to keep track of all this stuff, especially with how big AI is about to get. Yeah, the Department of Justice can say they're going to track and prosecute all these people that do this sort of a thing. And yet, there's just no way that they can possibly even start to do that. It's just disturbing to me how people can seem so normal on the outside, and then in secret, when they're in private, they're doing this sort of twisted, sick shit. And I have no empathy or sympathy for disgusting freaks like this guy.
She was strangled to the point that her neck was broken by her teacher, who then left her for dead in the woods. He was recently released from prison, and the video of them finding her is absolutely horrifying. This is the disturbing case of Ashley Reeves. On April 27th, 2006, 17-year-old Ashley Reeves told her parents that she was going to a job interview. So she took her boyfriend's car and then left her Belleville, Illinois home. But in all reality, Ashley was actually going to meet up with 26-year-old Samson Shelton, who at the time was a driver's ed teacher, but he had previously been a teacher at her middle school. Unbeknownst to everyone, the two had been having an intimate relationship together. At least that's what Samson says. What he was actually doing was grooming and abusing her since she was a minor. So when a few hours passed and Ashley never came home, her parents immediately reported her missing to the police. They then found the car Ashley was driving abandoned on the side of the road, and in it were the clothes that she was supposed to be wearing to the job interview. At this point, everyone knew that Ashley was in danger, so her mom started combing through her phone records to see who she'd been talking to in the days leading up to her disappearance. One number stood out, and it belonged to Samson. So when her mom called him, Samson said that he had no idea where Ashley was and hung up on her. At this point in time, he was line dancing at a country bar. Friends of Ashley's came forward and told police that she'd been seeing an older man and had planned to meet him the night she disappeared. This was enough evidence to bring Samson in for questioning, which is exactly what the police did. It would take 12 hours of interrogating for him to begin confessing, but at first he admitted that he was with her the day she went missing. But he said that they had had an argument while he was driving, and he kicked her out of the car, leaving her behind. He said he didn't do a single thing to hurt her. A few more hours would go by before he confessed to everything. He admitted to having an intimate relationship with Ashley, but said that she was persistent and that she was the one who pursued him for a long time. He then admitted to having an argument the day she went missing while they were driving. He said he tried to end things with her and she got mad, so he put her in a chokehold, which ended up breaking her neck. Samson said that her whole body went limp, and in a panic, he dumped her body in a wooded area in Citizens Park. He said that he wanted to make it look like she had been strangled in the woods. So to emphasize this, he put his belt around her neck and strangled her repeatedly. At one point, he was pulling the belt so tight around her neck that it actually broke. Thinking she was dead, he left her in the woods and then went line dancing at the country bar. This is when he spoke to Ashley's mom on the phone. She was looking for her daughter, and he had just gotten done brutally strangling her. Yet he decided to go line dancing, not having a single care in the world. So Samson told police where Ashley's body was, and when they went looking for her, they fully expected her to be dead. After 40 minutes in the pouring rain and complete darkness, police stumbled across Ashley's body, but somehow she was still alive, even after having her neck broken and being strangled repeatedly. On top of that, she was left alone in the woods with her injuries for 30 hours, but she was alive. Authorities didn't think she was going to survive because she suffered severe brain trauma from the attack, but she did. She spent the next year relearning how to swallow, walk, and talk, and although she doesn't remember much from that day, she is alive. Samson was then arrested, where he pleaded guilty to attempted murder. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but he was released a couple of months ago after having only served 17. He was given the earliest possible release allowed by the law, which is just crazy to me. He is clearly a danger to society. He will spend the next 3 years on parole and is banned from having any contact with Ashley. I feel like this isn't justice, and I can't even imagine how Ashley feels knowing that he is a free man. He hasn't shown any remorse, and even during the interrogation, he only cared about himself. He literally asked the detective if he would have a private toilet in prison because he can't pee in front of anyone else. Meanwhile, Ashley was laying there, slowly dying. What he did was deranged, and everyone in Illinois should know his face and be careful around him.
ever seen the video of it's a baseball game? They're like warming up and then a ball is about to hit the news person. And he turns around and he goes like this, the baseball
Yeah. Oh,
player.
yeah.
Do you remember what the news like anchor looked like?
Was a woman.
What?
Blonde?
Blonde, right?
Yeah.
Evan, there's been a lot of changes this offseason for your team. How do you feel your chances are in the AL East?
I mean, I love our chances. You know, it's been, Dad, keep it on the field.
That's not fake? That's how it is? Nah, bro. I called cap on that shit. There's no way. I remember her being blonde.
Me too, bro. I remember her being blind. I also remember her saying, wait, did you get that?
Yeah, I remember that too. These Mandela effects be tripping me out.
These are the most unusual deaths ever. A 26-year-old man from New Hampshire had a very bad case of snoring. So he attempted to cure his snoring by shoving tampons into his nostrils while he slept. So one night before bed, he stuck the tampons in his nostrils. Later that night, his partner tried to wake him up, but something was wrong. He wasn't breathing. It turns out he suffocated in his sleep from the tampons, and the sleeping pills he was also on added to the breathing difficulty. Next, a doctor from Houston, Texas named Hitoshi Nikito was killed after his head was trapped in an elevator door. At the hospital he worked at, he was partially decapitated as the elevator ascended, and he also had injuries to his ribs and spine. There was also reports that he was drunk, but it's not confirmed. Next, 21-year-old Josh Hutcherson was driving home drunk with his 23-year-old friend Francis Bromes. Francis was hanging out the window puking when Josh drove off the road and sideswiped a telephone pole, which Francis hit and completely decapitated him. Josh then drove home and went to bed, and his neighbor found the headless body of Francis in his back seat.
If you witnessed a murder, would you call for help? If you said yes, then think again. This is the horrific case of the murder of Kitty Genovese. It changed how we understand human behaviour forever. It was the 13th of March 1964. Kitty Genovese was a 28-year-old woman from Brooklyn. She worked as a bar manager in Queens and lived with her girlfriend Mary. She would frequently arrive home very late in the evening due to her role. On the night in question, things were no different, and she left work at around 2:30 a.m. Shortly after she left, a man spotted her in her car. This was 29-year-old Winston Mosley. Unfortunately for Kitty, she would become the target for this man, who admitted to driving around looking for a victim. Now, Kitty parked her car only 100 feet away from her front door. Chillingly though, Winston was hot on her tail. He came up behind her and launched a hunting knife into her back. Kitty screamed out in pain. She shouted, "Oh my God, he stabbed me, help me, help me." It's reported that several neighbours heard her cry, but only a few of them thought that it was a cry for help. A neighbour named Robert at this point heard the screams and rushed to his window. He would later tell police that he shouted for the man to leave her alone. He then saw the perpetrator run away. Little did Robert know that Winston simply went round the corner and waited 10 minutes to return to his victim. He went back to Kitty, who at this point was bleeding, unable to get through a locked door to get help. He once again stabbed her, he then AR'd her and robbed her. He left her there to die. Now, after this, it's reported that a man called Carl Ross had witnessed this and called his friends and asked them what he should do. They told him to obviously ring police, which he then did. Tragically, Kitty died on the way to hospital. Now, Winston was tracked down less than a week later and made a full confession to the hideous crime. The New York Times later published an article about the murder titled, "37 Who Saw Murder Didn't Call Police." The article discussed how, for around half an hour, 37 or 38 people witnessed the attack and didn't call police. Tragically, by the time they did, she was already dead. The newspaper report quoted one witness who apparently said, "I didn't want to get involved." There was also then a book published called 38 Witnesses, the Kitty Genovese Case. The theory of something called the bystander effect was birthed. This refers to how people in a crowd may be less willing to help somebody than if they were the sole witness to something. Essentially, the thought behind it is that if many people witness an incident or something horrific like a stabbing, for example, you may feel less personally responsible to help. You may also just incorrectly assume that somebody else has already got help on the way or somebody else is going to take charge. Whereas if you were the only person to witness it, you may feel pressure to help. Some people believe that the New York Times exaggerated the number of witnesses to the crime. It's also reported that someone did in fact call the police. Kitty's neighbour ran down the stairs and comforted Kitty as she lay there waiting for an ambulance to arrive. Now, regardless of the actual facts of the case, the bystander effect is widely known and used in psychology. Kitty's girlfriend actually passed away this year.
Is the worst candy ever made.
Nah, hold on. Let me really think about this shit, bro.
I'm gonna talk my shit. I have 4. So almond joy's part of that. I hate almond joys with a passion.
There's people that fuck with that though.
Nah, I don't care, bro.
There's like a big ass like audience.
I'm sorry, bro.
When it comes to like the minty chocolate, people love that shit. I don't like it. It's disgusting to me. But yo, there's a lot of people who like that.
Yo,
shit.
why'd you get canceled over some chocolate, bro? I'm gonna get tight. But milk duds are disgusting. Butterfingers are disgusting.
Ew. I know what's the top of the top, most disgusting, worst fucking candies of all time. If I see that, I will throw up.
What?
Red chili, some shit like that.
Oh, no, I know what you're talking
What
about.
is that? Even the gum is disgusting.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
The red gum?
The red gum is just like cinnamon flavored.
Who eats that candy, bro? You know what I'm talking about?
I'm gonna have you rank these from best to worst.
Oh my, I think this is gonna be harder than the candy, bro.
Snickers, M&M's, specifically the ones
yellow bag.
Yeah, yellow bag with
Oh
peanuts.
my god.
Kit Kats.
Oh my.
This man was caught on camera murdering his wife and he only got 10 years in prison. Carrie Birmingham, who was 60 years old, shot his wife Patricia Birmingham, who was 48 years old. He shot her 3 times outside their home in Spring, Texas, and the couple had been arguing for about 30 minutes after Carrie allegedly discovered the affair his wife was having. This incident was captured on video by his wife Patricia, and in the disturbing video, Carrie can be seen walking in the driveway with a bathrobe on and a shotgun in his hand. Carrie can also be heard telling his wife, quote, "Okay, bye. You're going to meet Jesus. I hope it was worth it," end quote, before shooting her 3 times and killing her. Whatever you do, don't look up the video. It honestly is pretty disturbing, and I wouldn't recommend watching it. After doing this, Carrie was arrested and charged with murder, being held on a $200,000 bond, and recently in 2024, Carrie Birmingham pleaded guilty to the murder, but claimed he shot his wife in the heat of the moment. And despite the jury being all females, the woman sentenced Carrie to 10 years in prison, with parole eligibility in 5 years. Now I'm going to play a short clip from the video showing Carrie talking to Patricia before he shot her dead.
Video? I'll pull it. I'm mad enough to pull it. Okay. Alright, goodbye, Reese. Nice to know you. You go meet Jesus.
I'm exposing a pedophile ring tomorrow and I need your help. So I've been researching this thing. It's called the Presidio affair for months now. I've reached out to victims, I've reached out to people associated with this story, and nobody wanted to talk to me. Even 30 plus years later, people are still afraid of this thing. And when you search for this pedophile ring on YouTube, on TikTok, nothing comes up. I'm probably going to be one of the only 2 or 3 people to ever cover this on YouTube, and this thing goes all the way to the top of the United States government. The summary of this story is that there was a pedophile ring operating on the Presidio military base in San Francisco, and children were being taken out of the daycare and abused in different places around the city of San Francisco. Now, this case was debunked by the US government, but there are so many things that haven't been explained, like the fact that 5 children who testified that they were abused were diagnosed with chlamydia. They've never explained that. There's also the fact that children were able to accurately describe the interiors of these buildings that were owned by their abusers. Like they were able to point out interior decorations and small minute details that it would have been impossible for them to know about if they hadn't been there. And there's so much more. But I need your help. Please show up tomorrow and watch the documentary. It's going to be posted on my YouTube channel, The Paranormal Files. The premiere is at 8 o'clock p.m. And I'm just trying to get the word out about this thing to teach people and show you how you can help. Because this is some really, really dark stuff. And we need to put pressure on the US government to stop doing it.
This woman claimed that her 18-month-old daughter would become the next Jeffrey Dahmer and killed her because of it. I don't think that I've ever been more angry reading a true crime case. This is Cheyenne Hill. Police were called to Riley Children's Hospital in Indiana on November 23, 2022 after Cheyenne's daughter, 18-month-old Eliana, was admitted with horrific injuries. Eliana was severely malnourished and had a brain bleed, a broken collarbone, bruises on her face, and a swollen and deformed head. After seeing just how bad her injuries were, someone in Child Services notified authorities about Eliana's condition, which sparked an investigation into Cheyenne. While she was still hospitalized, Cheyenne told police that Eliana would become the next Jeffrey Dahmer, a serial killer who killed at least 17 men and boys starting in 1978. She went on to say that she believed her daughter was not a nice kid and that something wasn't right with her. When police asked her why she compared her 18-month-old to Jeffrey Dahmer, she laughed, and as Eliana lay there dying, Cheyenne called her an asshole. Sadly, just a few days later, little Eliana would die because of her injuries. Her death was ruled a homicide as a result of blunt force trauma to the head. Early on in the investigation, it came to light that a couple of witnesses noticed bruises and swelling on Eliana's face in the days leading up to her ultimate death. And on one occasion, a witness even told Cheyenne that she needed to be taken to the doctor. But Cheyenne snapped back at them and said, quote, "No. Under no circumstances are you to call an ambulance or take her to the hospital. I will make the decisions. That is my child." End quote. Cheyenne would eventually take her into the hospital, but not for another 8 days. Authorities also found that Cheyenne reportedly told a neighbor that Eliana was going to kill someone one day, and she also blamed Eliana as being the reason why her boyfriend wouldn't marry her. Even with all of this evidence, it would take nearly a year for Cheyenne to be arrested in connection to her daughter's death. During the trial, prosecutors couldn't prove that Cheyenne was the one who inflicted the injuries, but they were able to prove that Cheyenne neglected Eliana after the abuse. Cheyenne reportedly left Eliana in critical condition after the abuse and went to work, which is what ultimately led to her death. On Tuesday, Cheyenne was convicted of child neglect causing death and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. She showed no emotion or remorse in court. It's stories like this that anger me so much and make me realize that not everyone should be allowed to have kids.
Why was this pop star murdered by a fan as she came off stage? Christina Grimmie from New Jersey was talented from a young age. At the age of 15, she decided to set up a YouTube channel in order to share her love of singing online. She started posting covers of pop songs and people loved it. She gained a huge 1 million subscribers and moved to LA to pursue her dreams. Other artists could see how talented she was. She made connections with some of them, including Selena Gomez. She actually eventually ended up supporting Selena on tour. In 2014, she ended up finishing 3rd place on the talent show The Voice. This grew her audience even more. However, on June the 10th, 2016, things would come to a tragic end. Christina was singing at Plaza Live in Orlando. Once the performance was over, she was eager to meet her adoring fans backstage. She planned to get some photos and sign some autographs with them. She had no idea this would be fatal. At 10:24 p.m., Kevin Loibl was waiting to meet the pop star. He'd been stood in line patiently. However, when she reached her arms out to greet him, he grabbed his weapon and shot her. 3 shots entered her head and chest. Now, Christina's brother, who was actually her manager, was there and witnessed the entire sickening incident. Acting on instinct, he rugby tackled Kevin to the ground. Tragically, though, it was too late. As Christina lay bleeding on the floor, Kevin unalived himself with his weapon. A member of staff at the venue described the situation as horrifying. Christina was rushed to hospital but tragically passed away. Now, police obviously couldn't ask Kevin why he did what he did because he was dead. They had to interview those closest to him to try and get a glimpse into the mind of the killer. What they found was that he left this chilling note on his door before leaving to go to the concert. It says, "Deepest sorrow for lost to the family, friends and fans of the very talented, loving Christina Grimmie." No other comments. It turned out that the 27-year-old from Florida had purchased weapons just the day prior. Now, frustratingly, it appeared that he'd gone into the venue with those weapons. His bag was seemingly not checked. Friends claim that the man was obsessed with the singer to an alarming extent. He would spend all of his time looking at her social media and pictures of her and videos online. When anyone would question him about it, he got really defensive. Christina's death understandably shocked so many people, and everyone was devastated. Fellow musicians rushed to social media to express their sorrow. Selena Gomez said, "My heart is absolutely broken." Her family created the Christina Grimmie Foundation in 2017 to raise money for victims of gun crime.
Travis Walton, he was on the Joe Rogan podcast. There was a documentary made on him. He's one of the most known and like one of the earliest alien abduction stories that went crazy viral because of how vivid and what he remembers experiencing. He tells the story the same every single time. This happened in 1975. Travis Walton and a crew of 7 people, they were out chopping trees. The sun was going down. They decided, we're gonna call it a day. Let's just get out of here. They all ended up going in the same car, and they see a bright light in the forest. And they're kind of confused, but also scared because they think, damn, what if this shit's a forest fire? As they're getting closer to the light, they realize that it's not a fire. It's a UFO with golden light coming from underneath.
Like the pictures that we always see online and stuff?
Exactly like that. Travis Walton decides, goes closer to see what the fuck it is. By himself, bro. Out of nowhere, this like blue beam of light sent him flying, bro, like 10 feet. From there, he passed out. The guys that were in the truck, they dipped.
They left him?
They saw that shit and they left.
Oh, man. What the?
They saw that the UFO wasn't following them. They went back for him. The UFO wasn't there no more. And there was no signs of Travis either. On the 5th day of him being missing, he ends up gaining consciousness and he appears in a random ass fucking highway. He remembers him waking up in the ship. He said that he didn't panic at first because he saw a square rectangular light.
He thought it was maybe the doctors or something?
He thought it was the hospital. He gained a little bit more consciousness. He looked up and there was like some sort of device on him. And then he saw 3 figures. They all had an orange jumpsuit. One of the figures was like staring him dead in his eyes. And he described them as like,
this streamer killed his girlfriend while live streaming, and it's one of the most disturbing things ever streamed. Stanislav Reshnikov, who was on the left as a vlogger slash streamer, was famously known as Stas Reflay, and he inflicted inhumane physical abuse on his pregnant girlfriend, Valentina Grigorieva, who was on the right when a viewer asked him to do so for merely $1,000 in his YouTube live video. Valentina's beating was followed by Stas stripping her naked and forcefully locking her outside of the house in sub-zero temperatures of December. Valentina kept on knocking on the door, telling him that she was going to die. After 15 minutes, Stas checked on Valentina as she stopped knocking on the door. He then found Valentina's unconscious, not breathing, and pale body. Stas made a failed attempt at resurrecting his girlfriend by giving her CPR. Eventually, he grew very scared of what he had done and called the paramedic team. In the footage, he can be seen carrying her back into his apartment trying to revive her. He is heard saying, "Velia, are you alive? My bunny, what's up with you? Velia, damn, you look like you are dead. Bunny, come on, tell me something. I'm worrying. Damn, I'm not feeling a heartbeat, guys. No pulse, she's pale. She is not breathing. Wake up, Velia, I love you, wake up." The paramedic team then arrived and announced Valentina dead upon examination. Initially, she was assumed to die from hypothermia. However, the forensic team revealed that Valentina had died from a head injury inflicted upon her during domestic violence. The police arrested Stas soon after he killed his pregnant girlfriend for money. And he was given a sentence of 6 years by the court in 2021. But what do you think about this? This man literally put his pregnant girlfriend outside in freezing cold temperatures for $1,000 because one of his viewers donated it and told him to. This is absolutely gut-turning, and the live stream, if you ever decide to watch it, is extremely unnerving, especially when her lifeless body gets brought into the live stream. Just hearing him talk to her and knowing that she's dead is extremely unsettling.
Start a fucking revolution. Start a fucking revolution.
On Friday, this man, Max Azzarello, set himself on fire outside of the New York City hush money trial of Donald Trump, and they're trying to make him look as crazy as possible. But what a lot of articles that I found didn't mention was the fact that Max had worked in politics and the financial industry for years. Yes, this is a real picture of him with Bill Clinton. Now, reading all these headlines, it seems like Max was a man with a death wish who just chose this way to go out. A lot of these headlines focus on Trump, and yeah, they frequently call him a conspiracy theorist, or note how he struggled with depression. What they fail to mention is Max's LinkedIn page, where if you scroll through, you will see that he was in the past employed in a number of important positions for important companies. I mean, you can even see right here, he worked on campaigns for people to get elected for governor. He worked in institutes of politics. And yeah, all throughout the financial realm. Other articles say that he posted a disturbing manifesto which makes him seem like some sort of a killer. This includes the information that he dropped on the ground before he did what he did. This booklet, in fact, was found right near the scene of what happened to Max. But I implore you, go read for yourself what he was talking about. I would definitely call this manifesto disturbing because of some of the information that's in it, but not disturbing in the same way that mainstream news is referring to it as. I mean, this was a guy that was extremely intelligent, had worked for years in politics and the financial world, and he was trying to raise some sort of an alarm with what he did. Now, unfortunately, I can't think of a way to go out that is possibly worse than that. But yeah, his Twitter is still up if you want to go check that out before it's taken down. And I just find these headlines interesting where he's called straight out the bat a conspiracy theorist instead of any of the other titles that he's held throughout his life. But rest in peace to Max. What a terrible way to die, unfortunately. But I will say that his death did get us talking about this stuff.
This case will put you off ever going to school again. This child was kidnapped by a school security guard. She wasn't rescued for 10 agonizing years. Tanya Catch lived in Pennsylvania with her dad and his girlfriend. Her parents split up early in her life and she didn't have much contact with her biological mum. She also didn't really get on with her dad's partner either. She was feeling unwanted and confused and turned to drink and substances to cope. She struggled to connect with friends at school and would often bunk off, leaving her quite vulnerable. In 1995, she came across a man called Tom Hose. At the time, he was 38, and he was a school security guard. He had a son of his own, just 2 years younger than Tanya. Now, initially, she was scared that he was going to get her in trouble. Obviously, she shouldn't have been bunking off. Instead, though, he made friends with her. He started grooming the 14-year-old with gifts and money. As she was a child, this was very appealing. He would buy her jewelry and sweets, and she thought he had good intentions. Thinking he really cared about her, they ended up kissing. Then in February 1996, things took a really dark turn. Tom told the young girl that they could run away together. She obviously felt that she didn't really fit in anywhere, so she obliged. On the 10th of the month, Tom took the child and hid her in his home. He actually lived with his parents and son, so he had to hide her from those people. After being sold a dream, Tanya soon realized that this was more like a nightmare. She had to be kept hidden in Tom's bedroom. She was unable to make any noise or leave the property. He fed her leftovers like an animal, and she had to go to the toilet in a bucket. Tom also regularly SA'd the child. However, she was too scared to try and leave. He would emotionally abuse her and convince her that she was worthless and nobody would even care where she was. He even threatened her that if she did leave, he would kill her and her family. Now, Tanya was reported missing, but police had limited involvement. They already knew that she had a history of running away. Tanya was initially held captive for 4 agonizing years, just 2 miles from her home. When she turned 18, Tom got a little bit more confident to introduce Tanya to people, but called her Nikki. He was confident that she was brainwashed enough to never leave. He would let her out of the house by this point, but always gave her a strict curfew to abide by. Years and years went by where she was pretty much trapped in this house, apart from the odd occasion he let her out. The young girl was still terrified to make her true identity known. Then in March 2006, the then 24-year-old woman was brave enough to tell a member of the public that she was actually the missing girl. She told a kind couple who owned a local deli about what was happening. She said if they looked online, they would find her on the missing child's website. The members of the public obviously took this information to the police. Tom was arrested and Tanya was overjoyed that she was finally free. After holding the girl for 10 years of captivity, Tom pleaded guilty to SA, amongst many other offences, in 2007. Shockingly, he was given just 15 years in prison and was released in 2022. Now, shockingly, Tanya's dad actually blamed her for her own kidnap. Therefore, the two do not have a relationship anymore. Tanya, however, is happily married and now advocates for other victims of abuse and trauma.
Kenny Veach disappeared after finding a mysterious cave near Area 51, and it's one of the creepiest missing person cases I've ever heard of. So Kenny was an avid hiker of 20 plus years and a YouTuber who would create videos of his solo hiking journeys in the deserts of Nevada and California. He became so comfortable and confident hiking alone that he would often camp for several days without a GPS, a compass, or a map. In June of 2014, Kenny came across a video titled "Son of an Area 51 Technician" and left a comment that would gain a lot of attention. Kenny detailed a scary experience experience he recently had after finding a mysterious hidden cave near Area 51, or more specifically, near the Nellis Air Force Base in the Mojave Desert. Kenny said that the entrance of the cave was shaped like a perfect capital M, but as soon as he got close to the entrance, he felt unusual vibrations throughout his entire body. He said the closer he got to the cave's entrance, the worse the vibrating got, and then an indescribable fear came over him. He couldn't explain it, but he was so scared that he ran out. In the comment, Kenny went on to say that he solo hikes across mountaintops that many people wouldn't dare to go, and that he's been in more caves than he can count. He said he plays with rattlesnakes for fun, but this particular cave was unlike anything he had ever encountered. His comment on this video kinda went viral, and a lot of people were pushing for him to go back and try to find the cave to document it. Almost every single comment was urging him to go back, all except for one that read, quote, "Do not go back there. If you find that cave entrance, do not go in. You won't get out." End quote. But this didn't stop Kenny, and on November 10th, 2014, he set out once again to try and find the M Cave. It was originally only supposed to be an overnight hike, so he kissed his girlfriend goodbye and told his family that he'd be back the next day. But Kenny disappeared that day, and he's never been seen again. When he never came back home, his girlfriend reported him missing, and a massive search was launched. Authorities began searching an abandoned vertical mine shaft that was in one of Kenny's recent videos, and there they found his cell phone. Several miles away, they also located Kenny's car. Other than this, no trace of Kenny has ever been found, and because of the nature of his disappearance, it sparked chilling conspiracy theories as to what could have happened to him. One theory is that Kenny became lost or injured and succumbed to the elements, or he could have possibly been killed by a wild animal. Another theory is that he accidentally fell down a mine shaft somewhere and just hasn't been found yet. But one terrifying theory that people have come up with is that the M Cave that Kenny found and was trying to locate again was the entrance to a secret government facility, and that his disappearance was due to him stumbling across government secrets in hopes of keeping him quiet. And of course, the biggest conspiracy theory that people have come up with is that Kenny disappeared after encountering aliens since the cave was near Area 51. But obviously these are all just theories and have never been proven. A more realistic theory has been brought up by his girlfriend. She says that it's possible that Kenny died by suicide as he reportedly struggled with his mental health in the years leading up to his disappearance. She mentioned that he left behind his camera, so he obviously was not going on that hike to film anything as most people thought he was. This would make sense considering a few life changes before he went missing. Just the year prior, Kenny suddenly quit his job to become an inventor. He reportedly invented an improved version of a toilet paper holder, and he even submitted the concept to Shark Tank. Kenny also tried to sell his house, but under one odd condition. He demanded that the new owner had to hire him as a caretaker and continue to let him decorate the house in his own style. Because of this weird condition, he never had any offers. Regardless, it's now been 10 years, and Kenny's disappearance remains unsolved.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
What are some Google searches that have led to people's arrests? Today we're going to talk about the dentist who was just arrested for putting poison in his wife's protein shakes. And I cover all sorts of spooky and true crime stuff on this page, so follow along for more. On March 6, Angela Craig went to the hospital for dizziness and severe headaches. She would eventually pass away as her symptoms got worse. But what we know now is that her husband, James Craig, was slipping both arsenic and cyanide into her protein shakes. And part of the reason we know this is because of what James was looking up on his work computer weeks before his wife's death. Searches like how to make poison, undetectable poisons, and 5 undetectable poisons that show no sign of foul play, as if there was a fun listicle about it. And the shocking part of all of this is allegedly not the first time that James had tried to poison his wife. He allegedly poisoned her 5 or 6 years ago, and she found out. And it's now believed that he was doing all this so that he could run away with another woman.
Morbid Animal Facts, Part 1. In India, a species called the sloth bear is far more feared than tigers because of their violent and unpredictable nature. This deer suffers from CWD, more commonly known as zombie disease. It damages the beast's brain, causing it to become confused and slowly waste away. The mantis shrimp, which is only about 3 inches long, can punch with the force of a .22 caliber bullet. The punch is so fast, in fact, that it boils the water around it and can even shatter glass. A moose is capable of diving up to 20 feet underwater in search of food and can swim 3 times as fast as humans. This photo shows the captive orca Tilikum looking at its trainers. Now, there have only been 4 deaths in human history caused by orcas, and Tilikum is responsible for 3 of them. Like and follow for part 2.
This is the most terrifying McDonald's you'll ever see. In 1986, the first floating McDonald's called the McBarge opened up. McPlan was to bring McDonald's to everyone around the world. The 5 employees that worked on the boat full-time started to hear voices. And it wasn't just regular voices. It was clown voices. And these voices just kept haunting them, telling them to end their lives and that their lives had no meaning. And that the clown was coming for them. The clown was coming for them. The clown was coming for them. This phrase was repeated to them over and over and over again, until it drove them to insanity. Slowly, the McDonald's workers started going insane and hallucinating. And after months of this, one fry cook decided enough was enough. And the next night, Megan took her life to get off the boat. After the incident, McDonald's had to close the McBarge. This is until 20 years later when a company found out the McBarge was still floating. Hearing about the ship's condition, one YouTuber decided to go inside of it. If you want to find out what happened to the YouTuber, make sure to like and follow for part 2. This is the most terrifying McDonald's you'll ever see. In 1986, the first floating McDonald's called the McBarge opened up. McPlan was to bring McDonald's to everyone around the world. The 5 employees that worked on the boat full-time started to hear voices. And it wasn't just regular voices. It was clown voices. And these voices just kept haunting them, telling them to end their lives and that their lives had no meaning. And that the clown was coming for them. The clown was coming for them. The clown was coming for them. This phrase was repeated to them over and over and over again, until it drove them to insanity. Slowly, the McDonald's workers started going insane and hallucinating. And after months of this, one fry cook decided enough was enough. And the next night, Megan took her life to get off the boat. After the incident, McDonald's had to close the McBarge. This is until 20 years later when a company found out the McBarge was still floating. Hearing about the ship's condition, one YouTuber decided to go inside of it. If you want to find out what happened to the YouTuber, make sure to like and follow for part 2.
Looking photos that have a disturbing backstory. Part 27. This photo shows an elderly couple doing the hokey pokey with a man named Dennis Rader, also known as the BTK Killer. He installed alarms for a living, and ironically, many clients booked his services to prevent him from entering their homes. This photo shows Luchadora Juana Barraza. She was sold to a man for 3 beers by her mother until her stepdad found her at age 17. Over the years that followed, she would strangle and rob over 45 old women that reminded her of her abusive mom. The man in the background is Christopher Wilde, aka the Beauty Queen Killer. This picture was taken on June 15th, 1984, and Chris is scouting future victims at a beauty pageant. This photo shows John Edward Robinson holding a baby girl named Tiffany. Just 1 day before this photo was taken, he murdered the baby's mother and gave Tiffany to his brother, saying that she was adopted. His brother, along with Tiffany, didn't find out the truth for 15 years.
Sometimes I hear stories so scary it makes me check every room in my apartment. So years ago, this older woman was living alone in her home in Denver. She had recently broken her hip, and before she went to the hospital, her house felt fine. But when she came back, something felt off. Like, it would sound like her caretaker was in the other room, but when she would go in, no one would be there. There were also way more like bumps in the night, and sometimes those bumps sounded like footsteps. Eventually, this woman starts thinking that her house is haunted. But one night, her caretaker is getting ready to leave for the day and she hears the noises. And she's like, I have to check this out. I have to get to the bottom of what this is. So she goes to the back stairs where she hears the sound coming from, and there she sees this skeletal man with sunken in eyes just staring back at her. And she loses it. She runs away screaming. She calls the police, and the police come and search the house, but they can't find anyone until they check the attic, and they see that there's this crawl space, which is about the size of a coffin, that an adult man had been living in. Yeah, and he had been there for 9 months. And crazier yet, the man ends up confessing to a murder. The whole story is super wild. Make sure you check it out on the podcast this week.
Huge trigger warning for this case, as it is very upsetting. 37-year-old Nancy Johnson from Alabama and her children were found deceased on the 28th of September. The mother of 2 drowned her children in the bath before taking her own life. Her children were 2-year-old Jacob and 5-year-old Maya. She also allegedly cut her daughter's throat. She then is believed to have unalived herself with a silk belt in a hallway wardrobe. The children's autopsies showed that they died from drowning, but Maya's blood loss contributed to her death. Heartbreakingly, the children's dad, Derek, was actually the one that found them. He found the bodies of the children on a sofa underneath a blanket. Nancy and Derek were in the middle of divorce proceedings and a custody battle. Nancy also had a history of mental illness. The parents had been ordered by a judge to start seeing the children on alternate weeks. The arrangement was due to start in just a matter of days. The dad wrote, "The amount of happiness and love that emanated from Mia and Jacob was very apparent to all that they were around. Our house was filled with joy and happiness. Their future was so bright in every way possible."
I would have peed myself if I saw this. So Sale was a paper delivery boy years ago, and what he saw on his route is terrifying. Before we dive in, if you love ghost stories, make sure you check out my podcast. This week's episode is all ghost stories from listeners. So when Sale was a paper delivery boy, he always delivered to this one house in his neighborhood where an old woman lived. She was not in great health, so she actually had given him a key so he could let himself in and leave the paper on the table. One day he lets himself in the middle of the day, and he sees that she's in her room lying in her bed fully asleep. This is not normal for her, so he calls to her, but she doesn't answer. So he puts the paper on the table and he just heads out. But the next day is the same exact thing. He comes into her house and she's asleep in her room, not moving and not answering. So he's like, okay, if I come back tomorrow and it's the same thing, I'm going to call for help. Except the next day when he arrives, she greets him at the door. And she's saying things like, "Thank you so much for delivering my paper. I loved seeing you around. I'm gonna miss you." And he's like, okay, that's kind of weird. So the next day he comes back to deliver the paper and there's cars all outside. So Sale runs up to a police officer and is like, "What's going on?" And the police calmly explains that the woman in the house had passed away days prior and a neighbor finally noticed and called it in. So then who did Sale see when he went to the house?
I'm not even cool. I'm just one of those girls that can do a lot of drugs and not die.
This is Mackenzie Sharilla, a TikToker who killed her boyfriend and his friend in 2022. So as you saw in that TikTok video, Mackenzie was bragging about her drug use. So in July of 2022, Mackenzie was in her car with her boyfriend and his friend, Dominic and Davian, and they were all just having a fun night smoking pot. That is, until Mackenzie, who was driving, decided to suddenly accelerate to 100 miles per hour in the vehicle. And she slammed the car into the brick wall of a warehouse going 100 miles an hour with no attempt made to hit the brakes. It's unknown exactly how Mackenzie survived this insane car crash, but like I said before, both other passengers, her boyfriend and his friend, died at the scene. Recently though, Mackenzie was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison for these deaths. That's because the prosecutors argued that Mackenzie actually set out to murder her boyfriend after their fling fizzled out. And she decided that the best way to do this would be a car crash. And her boyfriend's friend Dominic just ended up being cargo. I think once again, this is just an example of how someone can seem so normal on the internet, but you have no idea who they are or what they're capable of. But thankfully, she faced massive repercussions for her actions here. And she's going to be in prison for a long time and have a lot of time to think about the terrible decisions she made.
These are the top 3 most heart-wrenching true crime documentaries. Number 3 for me is Goodnight Sugar Babe. For me, this documentary is just so heartbreaking due to the amount of horrific themes involved and also just the vulnerability of the victim. It includes themes of CSA and the brutal murder and torture of a woman who is a young mum and also has learning disabilities. Number 2 is the trials of Gabriel Fernandez. Anything with kids involved, I personally just find so heartbreaking. This documentary series looks at the brutal murder of an 8-year-old boy. What makes it even worse is the horrific abuse that he suffered from his mum and his mum's boyfriend. He was also just let down in so many ways by the systems that are meant to keep him safe. And then number 1 for me is Dear Zachary. This documentary has a huge amount of interviews with people who knew the victim, family members, friends, and also a lot of home video footage. It's just such a real personal insight into this family, which I feel makes it even more heart-wrenching. I obviously won't spoil what happens in the documentary, but if this one doesn't make you cry, I don't know what will.
This woman murdered her husband for YouTube fame. Samantha was 20 years old when she met Ernie Ibarra at a tattoo shop and they quickly hit it off and started dating. Samantha had twins from a previous high school relationship that didn't work out, and Ernie became the father figure of these kids and worked hard to support the family. 3 years later, Samantha and Ernie had another set of twins, and then 2 years after that, they had a 5th child. Ernie worked multiple jobs to make ends meet, and in the meantime, Samantha created YouTube videos where she mainly complained about her kids and her husband. She had really high hopes for her YouTube career and started putting so much time into it and began neglecting her kids, and this caused a lot of fights between her and Ernie. On February 20th, 2015, police were called to Ernie and Samantha's home, and she claimed that 3 men broke in and kidnapped Ernie. During her interviews, police noticed a lot of inconsistencies in her stories, and she admitted that she knew the intruders, but she had nothing to do with it. Police eventually found text messages between her and the 3 men, and she was actually the mastermind behind all of this. On the night of the kidnapping, Samantha left the front door open for the 3 men to enter, and when they came in, they kidnapped Ernie, took him to the woods, and shot him in the head. Investigators believe that Samantha's motive was to gain sympathy and attention from her audience on YouTube after Ernie's murder. Samantha and Octavius were sentenced to life in prison, while Jose and Jonathan pleaded guilty and were only given 50 years each.
115 dead bodies were just found rotting inside of this funeral home in Colorado yesterday. This is an extremely disturbing news story. So this is the Return to Nature funeral home in Colorado Springs, Colorado. They specialize in green burials, which is kind of a new trendy thing, which amongst other things means that your body is not embalmed upon your death. So you're kind of left to rot and just go back into nature as you came into the world. But it seems like the owners of this funeral home took that process a step too far. So inside of this funeral home, where there's 2,500 square feet of space, they discovered 115 bodies. I mean, I can't imagine what the interior of that building looked and smelled like. And according to the police department that made this shocking discovery, most of those bodies were so badly decomposed that they can only identify them through DNA. Obviously, this means that these bodies have been stored there improperly for a very, very long time. In another interesting twist, the authorities actually stated that they don't know exactly what this funeral home was doing with these bodies. Some theories include they may have been selling body parts. Obviously, they may have just been telling people they were burying their loved ones and they weren't. Or there could be other gruesome, disturbing things that were happening here that I guess we'll find out about soon. Yeah, so since this happened yesterday, we don't know much about what exactly was going on here, but I'll be sure to update you guys once we find out more about what the hell was going on at this funeral home.
Kidnapped at 11, gave birth in captivity by 14. My name is J.C. Lee Dugard, and this is my haunting tale. Held for 18 years in a backyard prison in California. Only the bravest should stay. My name is J.C. Lee Dugard. In 1991, when I was just 11 years old and walking to my school bus stop, everything changed. Kidnapped in broad daylight by Philip and Nancy Garrido, I was imprisoned in their back garden, hidden from the world in a maze of squalid tents and dilapidated shacks. Every day, I was subjected to unimaginable violence, both physical and mental. The isolation was total, the despair omnipresent. But the worst was yet to come. At the age of 14, I gave birth to a daughter, the fruit of Philip's relentless abuse. A few years later, a second daughter was born under the same atrocious conditions. These girls, despite the circumstances of their birth, became my beacon of hope, my ray of sunshine in this hellish world. Years went by, each day seeming like an eternity. But in 2009, fate struck. Following an unexpected interaction with the police, my identity was discovered, putting an end to 18 years of captivity. Today, I'm free. I've been reunited with my family, and I'm fighting to rebuild my life. My story, though different, is reminiscent of Josef Fritzl's in Austria, 2 stories of survival and resilience in the face of adversity. I share my experiences to educate, inspire, and show that the human spirit can overcome the worst. For more heartbreaking stories, subscribe and leave comments.
If this isn't a terrifying reminder to always lock your doors, then I don't know what is. Quick trigger warning, the details in this case are pretty brutal. In 2021, 26-year-old Luke Dealey had been hearing voices. He was obsessed with the devil and claimed that a higher power was telling him he needed to kill someone. He'd recently been admitted to a psychiatric hospital and had stopped taking his medication. He'd also then enrolled at university, but soon left after his housemates found his behaviour weird. On November 21st, 2021, Luke decided to listen to those voices and find someone to kill. He roamed the streets looking for a house that was unlocked. That's when he came across the house of 65-year-old June Fox Roberts. That day, June had dropped her 2 daughters off at the train station and they promised to ring her the next morning to check in. That night, she went to bed as normal, but in the early hours of the next morning, something disturbed her and she went downstairs to check out the noise. She encountered Luke at the bottom of her stairs. Luke launched a frenzied and violent attack on June, and he hit her so hard in the middle of her forehead that she lost consciousness and fell to the ground. He then trampled all over her body before dragging her lifeless body into another room. But just killing June wasn't enough for Luke. He then used an axe to chop off her head, arms and legs. He then stuffed her body parts into black bin bags and left her right there in her dining room. Luke then attempted to clean up the mess in the hallway before shaving his beard off and dyeing his hair. He then fled the scene. When June's daughters couldn't get in touch with her the next day, they became concerned and decided to go to her house. They found her door unlocked and her dismembered body in the dining room. An appeal was put out to the public to find Luke after he'd been seen on CCTV in the area, and after 2 days he was found and arrested after sleeping rough in a trailer park. Police discovered that Luke had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital that year and he'd been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. They also visited his previous university accommodation and found some artwork that Luke had done that was of a demonic nature. Luke's trial began and June's family said that she was the absolute light of their life. She was a mother, a grandmother and a great-grandmother, and she loved nothing more than spending time with her extended family. They said that her death has absolutely shattered their lives. Luke pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility due to his mental health problems, and on April 28, 2023, he was sentenced to a hospital order which is indefinite, meaning he can stay in a mental health facility instead of being sent to prison.
This is probably every parent's worst nightmare. It all started on June 2013 when 8-year-old Cherish and her mother Rain and 2 younger sisters went to Dollar General in Jacksonville and met a man named Donald Smith. You see, Rain struggled financially, and when she couldn't afford to buy Cherish a dress that she really wanted, Donald overheard this and then offered to take her and her daughters to Walmart on a shopping spree. Donald then offered to give Rain and her daughters a ride to Walmart and she accepted. But when they arrived to Walmart, Donald was making very inappropriate comments to Cherish. And as the store was closing, he offered to go to the McDonald's in the Walmart and buy everyone some food, and he asked that Cherish come with him. Surveillance footage shows them leaving Walmart, and clearly Cherish looks comfortable around this person and she doesn't think he's a threat. Rain said that the store started to close and there was still no sign of Cherish and Donald, so she spent about 20 minutes looking for them until she called the police. They issued an Amber Alert, and finally at 9:05 a.m. they spotted Donald driving his white van and they stopped him, but Cherish was not in the car. When Donald was brought into custody, he was wearing the same clothes and he was all wet, but he told police that he was doing drugs all night and that causes him to sweat. But sadly, that same morning, Cherish's body was found at the bottom of a creek behind a church. She suffered very horrific injuries, and this is a trigger warning. Cherish suffered blunt force trauma to the head, she was strangled hard, and she suffered a lot of injuries in her genital area. It turns out that Donald was a registered sex offender and he was released from prison only 3 weeks prior, and he was charged and sentenced to death. Now, what's disturbing is a conversation he had with his mother in prison that was recorded, and he basically told her that Cherish followed him outside of the Walmart, so he had no option but to get rid of her.
A murdered toddler and a killer who now calls herself a celebrity and a prison pin-up. Star Hobson was just 16 months old when she was failed by social services during lockdown. Bruises were missed, as was a skull fracture and a fractured ankle. This one is particularly hard for me to cover as I have a son who's a few weeks older than Star. She'd have been turning 4 next month. Star was born on May 21st, 2019 to parents Frankie Smith and Jordan Hobson. Frankie was just 17 years old when she gave birth to Star. Star's parents split up not long after she was born, and Frankie, her mother, began a relationship with club bouncer Savannah Brockhill. At the beginning of 2020, after a call from one of Frankie's friends, social services visited twice, but closed the case shortly after. During this time, Frankie had got her own place, and the UK had gone into lockdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In March 2020, Savannah had become quite violent towards Frankie, and she'd also told a friend that she thought about driving them both off a cliff. During May and June 2020, calls were made to social services by Star's grandma and her father, saying that they were concerned for her safety, as Savannah had been using wrestling moves on 11-month-old Star to restrain her while Frankie did nothing. Social services visited and the case was again closed. The case was reopened in July. Just a quick trigger warning here, there is a picture coming up of Star's bruising. Star's grandfather had called social services after seeing bruising on her face, and this was checked out and was explained by Savannah and Frankie as being caused by a fall, and the case was closed again. That same month, Savannah had been seen on CCTV assaulting Star in town and dragging her through town by her reins while she struggled to walk. It was later found that the reason Star was struggling to walk was because she had a fractured ankle. On the 22nd of September 2020, Star's life was taken away at just 16 months old. She was playing at home when Savannah viciously attacked her and either kicked or punched her in the stomach, causing her organs to rupture as well as an artery, which caused internal bleeding. The force of that blow was likened to that of a car crash victim. The couple didn't call an ambulance straight away. Instead, they used Google to search for how to treat shock in babies. Star passed away that day, and a post-mortem showed old injuries, including a fractured skull and a fractured ankle. Frankie was sentenced to 12 years for allowing the death of her daughter, and survived